All right, guys, welcome back to the channel. And today we have Tauzin.
Yo.
So Tauzin, what are we doing today? I know we've been rolling around here in Orlando, and for the longest time, we've been talking about your car, right? Your F82 M4. Some people think this is like a factory color, but it's not.
Yeah, it's an individual, so it's a Tanzanite, so you have to special order it or whatever you call it, individually order it. I believe it's, you know, Ken, what was it, like $5,000 extra?
Yeah, so
it's
about $5,000 for individual paint. I know for me, when I bought my Amola Red, it was a 50th anniversary for BMW M, so it was cheaper, so I got a discount. It was like $30-something $100.
Yeah, so what's actually funny is that Tanzanite in this spec, or F82, F80s, is probably the most common individual color out there, which is really weird, but yeah, it's just one of those very common individual colors that people have ordered for these years. I
think a lot of people kind of want to figure out too is that what has it been like owning this car, right? Because you've had this car for quite a bit. It's been about how many years now?
I think it's almost 3 years now. It's honestly been a great car. I daily my car. I bought it with 50,000 miles. It's currently at 93,000, and it's, you know, fully modded. I haven't done the Crankhub. Cross my fingers. Don't jinx me, guys. But it's honestly been one of the most reliable cars that I've personally owned. And if someone were to ask me if I wanted to do it again or would they suggest buying one now, I would 100% say yes.
All right, so I came from the F80 M3. I had an awesome yellow F80. It was a great platform, but I grew to just move on to a different platform, right? We have the G80, but we're asking a F82 owner, right, what it's been like to own one. And one of the questions I had, what makes you believe that is one of the best cars to own, and why would you tell somebody to own it? Wow,
okay, changed it up on me. So I think that the F8X styling is like timeless. It immediately stood out to me when I saw it, when they announced it. Whereas the G80s for me, the front end just sort of stuck out like a sore thumb.
You can speak freely. It's not going to hurt myself and Danny's feeling right there. Danny's looking at what type of mods to do. He's going to be featured soon, so stay tuned for that episode. But speak freely to Tauzin.
Everyone knows I'm honest. So like I was never a fan of the G8X front end. It's always sort of bothered me. And for me to actually like the G80s or the G87s, they require a lot of visual modifications to make me like them.
Okay.
And for me to spend that type of money, it doesn't make sense. Whereas the F80s, all I had to do was really lower it.
Correct, and some spacers.
And I'm happy with how it looks. Maybe add some minor carbon, maybe add a lip at most. And that's a fraction of the cost compared to what I would have to do to get the G8Xs to where I want it to be.
Okay, makes sense, makes sense. And then for people that are interested about owning one, or they've just recently owned one, I know you mentioned Crankhub. How reliable has this been? And this is totally different because you're owning it from a manual perspective.
Yeah, so for me, it's been really reliable. I've had the typical maintenance items such as spark plugs and the coolant reservoir that started leaking. And the typical gaskets and valve cover. So those are the normal things that you're going to have to replace anyways. So with those going bad, it did not bother me to go ahead and replace those or have to replace those. Whereas, you know, the typical Toyota driver is going to be a little bit more annoyed because they're used to driving a car and not having to replace anything. So if you're used to BMW, it's normal maintenance. I haven't had to do anything crazy in terms of maintenance.
I know you mentioned Crankhub, and I keep saying this again because when I had the F80 M3, I wasn't too worried. I think a lot of people are worried with the DCT that we saw in Viet Ho's video, right? With the kickdowns and stuff. And I didn't tune my car. My car was still stock, and I think the next stages for those cars, if I was going to keep the car, was to actually tune it and to get more power because sometimes you get bored of the stock power. Yeah,
and I mean, you know, I'm sure some of the people that watch already know, but to reiterate, I'm on E85. I'm flex fuel tuned with the OTS.
He's too cool for us out here.
Yeah, and I'm a 6-speed, And I've just been very careful with how I drive the car to not spin the crank hub. I have the capture plate, but it's not perfect. It's not going to protect me like a
It's not a full fail-safe.
Correct. So I am cautious on how I drive, trying not to put too much torque into the motor to spin the crank hub. But at the same time, it's less likely on the 6 speeds, it seems like.
And going with the amount of power you push, let's just say you're pushing about closer to what, 550, 600?
Yeah, 550 horsepower and 600 torque.
Okay, is that to the wheels?
To the wheel.
Okay, and then with that, all that power, do you find your clutch slipping?
So it's sort of a loaded question because technically my clutch is slipping, but I don't think it was due to the increased in power. Like if I had a brand new clutch, it'd probably hold it perfectly fine. I think it was more so
the mileage,
the mileage, how the previous owner drove on that clutch. And for some of you may know that there's a clutch delay valve in the car for the F8X, the G8X, and you notice the 1-2, it's never perfect.
It's never.
Yes.
It's always sometimes a stutter, or it bogs you back
Right.
in, and then it makes you feel like you're a novice or a rookie with driving manual.
100%. So that is actually sort of slipping the clutch. So if every time you have a issue of 1-2, it's essentially slipping your clutch. So the clutch is burning itself out. I ended up pulling my clutch delay valve out, so it doesn't really do that from a 1-2 anymore. And I think it was just already too late by the time I removed that valve.
Gotcha, makes sense. Here's a question. I know the backstory behind this, right? The M4 wasn't always your choice,
Nope.
right?
Nope.
You did have a different choice before, but it was harder to
100%.
find.
Yep.
So if you had to do it again, and you could talk about that later, how would you do it differently?
I think if I was to do it all over again, I might have taken a little bit more time on the search, or I might have just spent a little bit more money to get exactly what I wanted. But at the same time, if I was to be in a four-door and the F80 instead of the F82, a lot of the mods that I did to this car, I wouldn't do on the F80.
Like a roll cage, I'm assuming.
Yeah, right. So like the roll cage, I 100% wouldn't have done that. The rear diffuser setup would have been a completely different diffuser setup. So I'm sort of happy I got this because—
Sounds like you're making a lot of excuses for your poorly purchased vehicle.
Yeah, so there's a lot of upcoming mods that I want to do on this car that I probably would never do on a F80. And part of that is like the GT4 front end conversion. It's just not something I would do on the F80 four-door.
Okay, and then is there anything that you regret doing, right? I think a lot of people go through the modding process and like, oh, I shouldn't have done that, or I should have done this, right? Because you've done a lot of, OEM plus mods, but is there anything that you would have done differently? We'll come back to you when you think about that.
Yeah, so I think one of the only things I would change if I was to do it all over again would be going with a different roll cage brand. And not because of how this was made. It's perfect. It's great how it is. It's just the mounting points of this one aren't the same as the OEM GTS cage. And there are companies out there that copy exactly the OEM GTS cage mounting location.
And what cage do you have?
I have the Studio RSR cage, which requires you to cut the carpet and drill into the bottom of the car to bolt in. So that's just one thing I probably, if I were to do it all over again, I would find one that bolts into the back seats.
So what is your favorite mod out of everything you've done? Obviously we talked about the OEM plus modifications. What is your favorite mod on the car?
It's so hard to say because I go into long gaps of not doing mods, and then I'll do one mod and it makes me love the car again. So my current favorite mod is my steering wheel, which, it's 50-50 because like I'm not big on removing airbags, but at the same time it drives amazing and it looks amazing. The equal length has to be one of the top mods on there because everyone knows the S55 sounds terrible. So the equal length was one of my top mods, and Man, yeah, those two are probably one of the top ones, besides, you know, basic maintenance items where I got improved products of what I had to replace.
Okay. And then last question, right? I think a lot of these questions were gearing towards your ownership experience. And this is one that probably people want to figure out. What keeps you from selling this car and going on to something else or getting rid of this car in general?
Yeah, so one of the biggest reasons why I went Euro in the first place was I needed a platform where I could easily mod it, make power, or be able to have the options of modding it, right? So JDM sort of fell out of that aspect when I was looking, because after the IS300, they went with the IS250, IS350. There weren't a lot of mods for those.
It was more like a family sedan.
Yeah.
Or like your normal 9-to-5 job,
right.
You know, driving to work and stuff.
Right, and even back then, Toyota they didn't really have the FRS BRZ at the time. The Supra wasn't out at the time. And that's when I first got into BMW. And ever since getting into that, realizing how easy it was to mod them, make power, kept me in the Euro scene or in the BMW scene. And that's sort of why it keeps me in that realm, because they're so mod friendly in terms of cars. The environment, or the family as you will, is just so vast, and the options are endless out there that everyone could mod their vehicle their way without having to copy one another.
So basically you're saying that the amount of modifications and also, would you say there's still a rawness to this type of car too?
Yeah.
Because people say that the rawness left with the E46, the rawness left with the E9X platform. Is there still rawness with this?
So
I just gave you another question. Sorry.
Yeah, so I definitely think that with every iteration, I'll restart.
Yeah.
I think with every
Those are racers out here in Orlando,
Yeah.
just letting you guys know.
I think with every iteration of BMW, a little more of the rawness gets removed. So my F80 or F8X is definitely not as raw as an E92, and an E92 is not as raw as an E46. So you lose a little bit moving forward, but I definitely think there is some sort of rawness driving this car. When you're driving it and the back end kicks out on you, you notice it way more than the newer models out there. Some of you might disagree with me, but that's just what I think.
Yeah, and everybody has their own opinion too,
Yep.
but I definitely want to thank Tauzins for giving us the opportunity to talk about this, because there are some people out there that are actually looking into getting into F82. This gives you a better opportunity to understand the ownership like, and also what keeps him as a longtime owner of a car like this. So I want to thank you for chiming in.
Absolutely.
And we'll see more of him. Obviously, when we go to LA, we're going to be preparing for the invasion of Los Angeles. It's going to be a lot of fun, a lot of stress, and a lot of eating. So I may take you guys throughout that process too, because that's the only reason why I worked out anyway.
Come talk to us.
Yeah.